It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Kristen Welch, and we're going to be discussing her new book, Made to Move Mountains, How God Uses Our Dreams and Disasters to Accomplish the Impossible. Kristen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here today.
Well, let's kick off our conversation with a bit of what we might call the Kristen Welch origin story. So for the listeners, the viewers who are encountering you for the first time in our talk today, what are a few things they need to know about you?
Well, I'm a wife and mom and started blogging about 12 years ago, which makes me a very old blogger these days. I've written 5 books, and I guess what I'm most proud of, work-related, is starting Mercy House Global, which is a nonprofit that empowers women in poverty with dignified jobs in Jesus' name. And we sell a lot of fair trade product to do that. We empower them to create items, and then we sell them in our retail stores and also our subscription club called Fair Trade Fridays. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, and 12 years in as a blogger, you're like one of the original bloggers in the Christian blogosphere, if that's how long you've been at it. In terms of your writing journey, was blogging your introduction into the writing space, or had you written some books prior to that?
No, I hadn't written any books prior to that. It was definitely my first dabble, I guess, in what I would call public writing with an audience. I am an English major. I used to write curriculum and Bible studies and things that were more for personal use. My husband was a youth pastor, and blogging, I think I started in 2007. So that was definitely my first, I'm going to publish myself trial run.
Well, and I'm still encouraged when I hear stories of bloggers becoming authors. As much as you might think that isn't a thing anymore, I still encounter a handful of authors every year that they got started with a blog, or they had a blog post with a message that went viral, and all of a sudden they were able to transition into that space of publishing. So I love how God can take us from those places of small beginnings and turn it into something much bigger. I mean, look at you. You're here 5 books further down the journey, and it all started with taking a chance and publishing that first blog post, which is many of us know who've been blogging and podcasting, that those first pieces of content are scary because we don't know what we're doing. We feel like we're kind of out of our comfort zone, yet God uses it to grow us and shape us. Well, let's jump into the message about the book. So the theme of your book is related to different types of mountains that we're going to be facing in our life journey. So talk to us about those different mountains of dreams and those mountains of disasters that are likely to be before us on the journey.
Yeah, when I set out to write this book, I think life happened is probably the best way to summarize. I thought it was going to be a book just about the dreams, the mountains that we want to climb, that I think God created us all with a unique purpose, and He's placed our loaves and fishes in our hands, whatever that might be. For me, it was this dream to write and to really just share what God was doing in my life. I think that in the process of living that out, disasters happened in my path in the writing of the book. And so I had to just really step back. I asked for an extension. I had a little come to Jesus meeting and try to figure out how He was going to use the unexpected disappointments in my journey to glorify Himself and to teach me in the process. And so I really feel like the book became more of a real story of those disappointments and dreams that we pursue in life. And I think we just don't know what's around the next corner. And I think we're living that today. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And that's what this story is. It's really just inspiration and challenge to take whatever life throws at you, whether it's an ambitious dream that is successful or it's a flop, to take the bends and the turns and the valleys of the shadow of death and find redemption in all of those unexpected corners of life. It's definitely where I'm at right now, and drawing from those experiences, for today and for tomorrow.
When you're about a decade into the journey with Mercy House Global, there are plenty of mountains to face as a mom, as a wife, as an author, and just doing life on a day to day basis, let alone taking on a ministry that's having a global impact. What sorts of unexpected mountains did that journey bring into your life?
Oh my goodness. It's still bringing unexpected mountains into my life. Again, I am a writer, an English degree major. I don't think I really set out to start a nonprofit. I was just wrecked by the world's normal, and it interrupted my normal. And Mercy House Global was that response 10 years ago. And it has changed everything for me, the way that we live, the way that we shop, the way we parent, the way that I have really pursued Jesus. It's made me desperate for God. I think dreams do that. And that has definitely been, I didn't know it was my dream, but it became my dream. And they have a way of making us desperate for Jesus, because if he asks us to do something bigger than we can accomplish on our own, we need him and his help to do it. But we've experienced death, disasters, diagnosis, every everything you could imagine. We have 3 maternity centers in Nairobi, Kenya, where we have helped young girls between the ages of 12 and 16 who've gotten pregnant through trafficking. We've had over 55 babies in the last 10 years, and walking with those families through their personal devastation and helping them find a new path and reconciliation and restoration, and employing their families to dignified jobs. I mean, anything that probably could go wrong has gone wrong. But at the same time, God gives us what we need, and he's made perfect in our weaknesses. And we take it one day at a time and depend on him quite a bit. So it's been, it's really just changed everything for me.
Well, another thing I wanted to have you comment on is why it's important that we find ways to remember our prayers, remember our dreams. I can say from my own spiritual journey, journaling has been huge for me because there are things that I feel like God brings to mind in prayer or things that he gives us to start dreaming about with him. And if I don't write those down, I'll tend to forget about them. And so for me, that's been a helpful way to record and not forget kind of where God is leading me. So in terms of your journey, how have you found it helpful to be intentional about remembering prayers and dreams?
Well, I definitely think writing has been that avenue for me. I feel like I've always been a process writer. I'll have just the seed of a thought, an idea, a dream, whatever it is, and I don't really know how I feel about it until I write it down. And so, in a lot of ways, my blog has been that outlet for me. I mean, if you go back years, it's messy and painful. And even today, it's just unfinished. And I think this book is unfinished. A lot of the stories I share they don't have that happy ending yet. But that has helped me. It's kept me accountable, and it's helped me process what God is speaking to me and what he's saying to me. I feel like writing is sort of like a crock pot for me. I'll, dump all of my thoughts, ingredients into the pot and then let it simmer and stew. And I'll go back and read something I've written 3 days earlier. And I'm like, wow, that's really how I feel about this. And so God's used that as a way to help me figure out who I am and what he wants me to do.
Another thing I'd love for you to comment on is why it's important that we choose to feel, maybe experience our grief, you might say, instead of running from it. Because we're in a time in society where we can numb ourselves from everything. We can
Mm-hmm.
just sit there and watch Netflix. We can pursue all kinds of things to distract us all day long. And we can really intentionally choose not to process, not to feel our grief. But why is that a critical part of a journey to actually feel, endure, experience that grief?
Well, I think it's part of how we grow and heal. I actually write a lot about that in Made to Move Mountains, just giving myself permission to grieve. And it was sort of a new thought. I am an Enneagram 1. I am an introvert, an overachiever. My top strength in Strength Finders is a strategic thinker. So I'm a problem solver. I don't grieve easily, and I don't give myself permission to grieve because I like to have it all together. And in the process of writing Made to Move Mountains, I faced something with my family that was really difficult, still living it. And I think every family can identify with just unexpected mountains in our path that impact us. And I had a friend say to me, you need to give yourself permission to grieve and feel all of the disappointment and fear and disillusionment and everything that you need to feel. You just need to give yourself permission. And when she said that, I started crying, and I realized that I hadn't done that I was trying so hard to be strong. And I think that's one of the things. It's been a gift to run Mercy House for so many reasons, but having a global perspective has really impacted every part of my life. And so in this regard, I just kept saying, well, it could be worse. Everything could be worse, right? I mean, that's the thing about perspective. This being homebound and in quarantine, it could be worse. And so I think just giving myself permission to feel the loss and the disappointment, it was really the start of a healing journey for me. And just recently, in the past week or so, I had a talk with one of my kids who just really needed to grieve the disappointment and loss that she's facing right now. And just cry it out and let it go. And then we can, move on past those feelings. But I think it's okay. And sometimes we just need to hear it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel what we feel, because we serve a God who wipes the tears from our eyes and who comforts us and sends the comforter and who gives us peace that passes our understanding and who's there. And it's not trite or just scripture we're throwing out that doesn't, it's alive. And when we can just pause and say, God, this is how I'm feeling. He already knows it, right? He knows what we're experiencing, but there's just something really powerful in confession and in Made to Move Mountains, it was really important to me to have a place to journal in the book. And so at the end of every chapter, I asked questions that really I felt were asked of me and I had to answer. And as a way just to process some of that grief and what we're feeling on the mountain.
Well, I want to pull on a thread of something you said a little bit ago, and that was that some of the stories are still unfolding, some of the stories are still unfinished. Would love to have you comment on why it's powerful when we choose to share our stories, even the stories that don't have happy endings, even the stories where we're not completely sure where they're going to go, they're still unfolding. Why is that powerful for us, and why is it powerful for the people we're choosing to share with?
Well, I think it just makes us human, right? I mean, it's like we live this filtered life now, and we have the option to make everything beautiful. Visually, on Instagram and Pinterest and all of the social media outlets. But I feel like we can do that just in life. And there's something very beautiful about vulnerability. I mean, I truly believe it's the definition of courage when we can be vulnerable and let people in and show them our messy places. And I don't know why that's been a part of my story from the very beginning. I think because there's this opportunity when you are in this space online, especially 10, 12 years ago, to elevate people and to make it about a platform. And, blogging in itself is very egocentrical, right? You're putting your thoughts out there, your photos, your ideas, and asking people to buy in to you're building a brand, an audience. And that always really turned me off and just felt like that's not who I am. And so from my very first blog post all throughout my books, any speaking, if you know me, I'm going to show you the ugly side of things because I don't want to be put on that platform or pedestal, I think it just gives me further to fall. And so I do share a lot about the untidy stories and the gut wrenching feelings, and like, how do I fit the third world normal into my first world normal? And can I buy a new couch? And how, how do I reconcile all of this? And there are many things I don't know how to reconcile. And I think that's okay. Someone told me a long time ago that, if you're um, swinging to one side of the pendulum too far on either side, you're not healthy. Whether that's, when I returned from Kenya 10 years ago, I decided that I had a spending problem and I bought too much junk, home decor or whatever. And so for a solid year, I tried not to buy anything. And I swung to the other side of that spectrum and really just lived in a really unhealthy place of guilt and self-condemnation that wasn't healthy. And where I found that I can thrive is in the middle of that spectrum. And that's really the middle for me, is struggle. If I stop struggling with something, I know that maybe I'm swinging too far to one side or the other. But in the middle, that's where we find the answer. And so being vulnerable, sharing our story, it helps us. Like, that's how we grow. But when we can invite other people into that vulnerability, it helps them grow because they identify with what we're saying. They have empathy. And I feel like the world needs more empathy. And it's just been a very genuine journey for me of self-discovery and also identifying with other people's mountains.
Well, and needless to say, we're walking through a tragic season in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. That's when we're recording this episode. However, I feel like one of the silver linings is, as a nation, as a global society, I think we'll be able to have more empathy for each other because we are walking through just a massive crisis together. And just the level of shared experience, I think, is going to open up something redeeming and special and unique on the other side of this that maybe we haven't been able to truly feel or truly experience together in the last 5-10 years, whatever, because we haven't had something on this scale for many, many years across global society. So, and if you were to think through the lens of the message of your book, and for the person out there who's listening or watching this, we're all facing mountains we don't know how to climb right now. What would be your courage? What would be your encouragement for those folks in terms of how do they keep pressing forward? How do they keep remaining hopeful day to day? And how do they endure to the other side of this mountain they're maybe walking up right now? They feel like they're in the steep part.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I had no idea that when I launched this book a month ago, it would be in the middle of a global pandemic. But I think that God knew, and I know He knew, and He's sovereign, and His word is true and it's timeless. And I think I would just say, put one foot in front of the other. I mean, I know that's what I'm doing every day. I have had a full gamut of emotions over the last 3 or 4 weeks. I have an immunocompromised kid, and this is my worst nightmare as a parent. And just the fear and the uncertainty of our future as a people, it's overwhelming. And I think we put one foot in front of the other. That's how we get through this. We don't stop too long and stay where we're at too long. I think that's when we get a little unhealthy, right? I mean, we binge Netflix for too many days, or we live in that moment of despair for too many moments. I think that we put one foot in front of the other, and we don't do that alone. There is this sense of, we are together, but in a lot of ways we're alone because we aren't living in our normal communities. And but I believe we're never truly alone. Even in our most isolated moments, we have we have Jesus with us. And it sounds, trite to say that, but I truly believe that um, he is our peace giver and he's our comforter, and he walks with us uphill, downhill, around the hill. He's always with us. And so if you're listening today and you feel just alone, you're not alone, because Jesus is with you and he's right there. Just the saying his name, can bring us peace. And I think we put one foot in front of um, the other, and we just lower expectations. I know that 3 weeks ago I wasn't thankful for the sun shining or a bike ride or a full pantry, and what I took for granted a month ago, I'm so grateful for today. And this is just forcing us to slow down and be reflective. And I don't think we necessarily have to be productive to be successful through this. I think some personalities are hyper productive. I know my son is a senior in high school, so he's facing his own just loss in this because so many things have been canceled. But I asked him the other day if I could redo his room. And he was like, why? I'm about to leave for college. And I'm like, please give this to me. I just need a project. And I'm like, I need you to let me paint your room or whatever it was. And we just laughed about it. So I tend to be a little more on the productive side, just my nature, my personality. But I think just giving ourselves permission to get through this however we can in the most healthy way possible. And not going it alone, not trying to do it on our own and our own strength, because this is an opportunity to just let Jesus into those vulnerable places and feel what we're going to feel, and know that he is there with us in the middle of it.
And in terms of your journey with writing this book, if you had to contrast this with the previous 4 books that you wrote, what's that one thing that stands out in terms of how you were shaped, shifted, or changed in the process of writing Made to Move Mountains?
That's a good question. I think every book for me has been a journey. Some have gutted me and healed me. Some have challenged me. One of the parenting books I wrote, it was literally the hardest thing I've ever done. Um, this book was so unique for me because it was almost prophetic in a way for me. I didn't know, when you hand your publisher an idea for a book called Made to Move Mountains, I thought I was going to be talking about the mountains I had overcome successfully. I didn't know that around the corner there were going to be mountains that I would still be overcoming and that would devastate me. And so this book is definitely, I would say, my most vulnerable writing, because I can't wrap it up in a neat, tidy package with a bow on top. And so I'm really proud of it in that sense that I feel like it's what God wanted me to say. I also feel like it's probably my last book for a while. I've done 5 books in 10 years. And it's interesting at the end of this book, when I finished it and turned it in, I just felt like just this impression from God that it was time to be quiet for a while. And I don't really know what that means because that was a month ago. But I am living this really incredible story through Mercy House Global. And I feel like I need to be quiet for a while. So we'll see what that means. But it's definitely been an amazing journey, and it's been really hard too.
Well, now we'll get to what you'd like the reader to get out of their journey with the book. So, when you think of a reader getting to that final page, closing that back flap, if they take away one core idea, they're somehow shifted or changed in one way, what's that one thing that you hope every reader takes from the book?
Yeah, I hope that when you turn that last page, you feel like you've had a cheerleader in your ear the entire time saying you can do this, you're supposed to do this, God wants you to do this. At the same time, because mountains, I think we experience both kinds of mountains, dreams and disasters. In the other ear, I want people to know that they're not alone, and that God will somehow redeem everything, the loss, the fear, the devastation that they face, that they're not alone, and that at some point we may see it or we may not, that He will be glorified through our suffering. And that's really what I hope readers take away.
And Kristen, for the listeners, the viewers who'd like to find out more about you, your ministry, and your various books, where should we go on the web?
Probably wearethatfamily.com is the best place. That's going to give you a link to books and ministry and all the things.
And like we do with every episode, we'll have detailed links in the show notes, places where you can connect with Kristen and pick up your own copy of the book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Kristen Welch. Once again, our book today was Made to Move Mountains, How God Uses Our Dreams and Disasters to Accomplish the Impossible. Again, if you'd like to connect with Kristen and find out more, a great place to start is her website. You can check that over at out over at wearethatfamily.com. And Kristen, I just want to say thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's been a great honor to have you join us for the show.
Thank you so much.